One thing that's really interesting is in the book, you actually compare the response after the Great Depression with what actually happened after the recession, and how after the Depression there was massive organizing, massive fights. The left really had it together and really, I mean, obviously it's not that simple. I'm making it easier than it was. It was a lot of blood, literal blood was spilled to get what we had in this country. Compare the two. Compare what happened after the Great Depression and the lack of organizing that happened after the recession, and why that is.
Yeah, man, that's one of the key points of the book. How much the culture has changed. It's not just the economic shifts that we've been seeing. During the Great Depression, you had a lot of, anger and resentment that was channeled through organizations like labor unions, right? People organizing to change the system. And, their voices were heard by government, right? Roosevelt pushed forward certain policies, pretty robust government intervention to create jobs, like the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, all these really muscular approaches to deal with the problem of inequality and the problem of unemployment. So there was a consensus among much of the public that something had to be done, and it had to be done collectively. Well, fast forward to our period, you had the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression, and yet there was a lot of apathy, and if there was anger, it was directed at, public sector unions, right? They had too much in pay, their pensions were dragging down state budgets, and so on. There were, pushes in Wisconsin to roll back their collective bargaining rights. For the first time ever, approval of unions in the public dropped below 50% in those years after the Great Recession struck. It used to be 3/4 of Americans approved of unions, right? So it's been a sea change. And I think that part of it is just the dominance of a certain economic way of looking at the world that says we got to cut costs, we got to cut government, we have to be competitive, and so on. And it's frankly, it masquerades as economic science, and yet it is so political in its origins. It's really pushed by certain people who benefit from lower taxes, lower regulation, and so on. So I think that we need to get at the heart of that cultural issue and change the way people think about this situation, that they can organize, they can achieve something through mass movements, because we have enough numbers to change things. And you could see that glimmers of hope, I think, in the organizing for the Fight for 15 campaign, to fight to raise the minimum wage to $15. You could see a lot of organizing in Black Lives Matter and other kinds of grassroots approaches to deal with problems of economic, racial, and other kinds of injustices. So there are kind of approaches that are being taken, but it is troubling that we don't have the kind of bodies on the ground that we had during the Great Depression, where it seemed this was truly a mass movement. It's become, somewhat, not a matter of concern for a lot of the public, unfortunately. In fact, they are pretty hostile to collective approaches like labor unions.
Yeah, what's crazy, again, is like everybody benefits from organized labor, and then that so many people are against it, which again is just, it just goes to show how successful the very few who profit off of destroying labor and organized labor have been at, like, getting people to think so poorly of it. And not that labor is perfect, obviously, but what's even more interesting is actually you talked to so many of the auto workers who had lost their jobs, and even the auto workers themselves, who are the direct victims of this kind of unfettered markets, unfettered capitalism, all this deregulation, the people who are the directly affected don't even blame the companies. Most of them blame themselves, or they blame the unions. Talk a little bit about that, because the psychology of that is unbelievably interesting.
Yeah, I should say that, plenty of them did, blame the companies, but it was surprising. I mean, this is the most, I guess you would call them the most union-friendly group that you could find, right? I mean, these are members of United Auto Workers who have a historic role in the labor movement in this country that led many of the fights, for pro-worker policies, even led fights for civil rights. I mean, Walter Reuther, the president of the UAW, literally stood beside Martin Luther King Jr. during the, his "I Have a Dream" speech. So, this is a pretty storied union, right? And yet you had members of it who were in part being realistic because, the economy, its competition is heightened, and there is this constant drumbeat that workers are being paid too much, especially in the auto industry. That said, I mean, these high wages were a point of pride for American men and women in the post-war period, in the years after World War II. And so now it's a sign of, of excess for some reason, even though, CEO pay is now 300 times that of the ordinary worker in their companies, right? It used to be 20 to 1 in 1965. Now it's 300 to 1. So it's kind of skewed priorities, right? We're focused on overpaid auto workers and yet not so much on overpaid CEOs. And I think, as you mentioned, Matt, there's problems with labor unions, obviously, and my workers, many of them brought them up, things like unfairness, the more extreme cases of corruption or things like that. Though, I think the labor movement has cleaned up its act considerably since, the times of, government hearings and so on about labor unions. But it's undeniable at the same time that they are a force for greater equality and help for the middle class in the society. They not only help their members, they lift up wages even in non-union plants or firms or companies where they operate. They also push for legislation, things like the minimum wage, things like health care for everyone. So you can look at the decline in inequality, under the rise of labor, and on the opposite end, as labor unions have fallen to just 11% of workers today, you've seen rapid rises in income inequality, unprecedented levels, in fact, in that area, and wealth inequality that goes back to the 1920s in terms of its level of severity. So we're back in Great Gatsby times these days. So I think that we forget that role that labor unions play for greater equality, and yet at the same time, ordinary Americans do not have those protections of the labor movement, and yet at the top, you see individuals organizing. You see Wall Street definitely organizing, right? They are pushing for, changes in legislation to help them, so that, for instance, Warren Buffett famously said that he pays less of a proportion of his income than his administrative assistant, right? Those are just, there's much more in terms of how Wall Street has pared back regulations on the risky financial products that helped bring about the Great Recession, right? So there's collective organizing at the top, and there's no power that's similar at the middle and the bottom.